Okay, we might make a start, and if we have any latecomers, they can join in as we go. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. For those who I haven't met, my name is Catherine Colbert, and I I'm here on behalf of Partners in Ag, who is a not-for-profit organisation that facilitates training workshops with farmers. And we're very excited to be here tonight. This webinar series has been funded from the Australian Government's National Landcare Program and supported by the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority. So thank you very much to the Wimmera CMA for having us this evening. A bit of housekeeping for tonight. We are expecting a large group, so please stay on mute and videos off during the presentation. If you have questions along the way, David will stop regularly to ask for questions, or alternatively, you can add them into the chat. Now, about David. David is an agroecologist and has over 20 years' experience in rural landscapes, farming and food systems. He develops and delivers many of the extension projects for soil land food across Australia. David has had a wide-ranging career working in both management and technical roles, including land care extension, agronomy, soils, agribusiness, fertiliser, R&D and manufacturing, organics, training and consulting. And apologies for reading it out because I don't want to miss anything. David also teaches soils, regen ag, farm planning and agroecology at TAFE New South Wales on a casual basis. His passion for agroecology and empowering farmers with knowledge and skills that makes a difference is why he's here today. So welcome, David, and I will hand over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Catherine. Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for coming along. I can see a few people I know, but yeah, lots of people I don't know. So yeah, welcome along to the course, everyone. I can see Scott from up North Queensland. G'day, Scotty, and Sarah, I think, as well. But yeah, g'day everyone. Thanks for coming in. I'm just going to share my screen so we can kick off and get organised. So tonight's the first session in our 4-part series called Reboot Your Soil Health. So yeah, welcome along. They're 90-minute sessions, Jen. I saw that comment in the chat there about how long each session is. They're 90-minute sessions, and Catherine's recording them, so I think you'll have access to them if you can't get to all of one of them or you miss one of them, etc. So welcome along, everyone. I can see that they're just looking at the registrations. There's people from all over Australia in all types of farming systems and situations. So yeah, I hope you all get something from it. As Catherine mentioned, I will pause for questions every now and again. It's a really big group, so if you just probably chuck them into chat. If you have something, chuck it into chat, and we'll try and make sure we cover it as best we can with such a big group. All right, I better get started. So I guess the first session here in Reboot Your Soil. Here's a bit of healthy soil on a veggie growing place in northeast Victoria, near home, near my place here at Albury. This is at Beechworth. And yeah, it had some pretty serious soil constraints, what we call soil constraints. So it had acidity, high aluminium, compaction, bit of a farming history that had led it down to a sort of degraded state, if you like, and through some, combination of management practices like cover cropping and liming, etc. It's been rebooted. So I'm going to start off with just a quote from one of the Regen Ag rock stars, also a champion of soil health. There is no need to be pessimistic about soil when soil making can be rapid and cheap. While it is true that only 1/10 of the Earth's surface is covered with soil, and not too much of this could be classed as highly fertile, it has to be realised that agriculture itself can be a soil making process. So the key statement there is that agriculture itself can be a soil making process. So I guess this is actually from one of the pioneers of soil health, I guess, in Australia. It's from P.A. Yeomans, who was a bit of a famous agricultural innovator in the 1940s and 50s. He developed the Yeoman plough. He also developed keyline planning, which permaculture uses a lot in the planning process. And he was all about rebuilding topsoil for healthy, particularly in his case, pastures. And so, yeah, he made the statement that agriculture itself can be a soil-making process. And I guess that's the challenge we're on. Can we build and maintain a healthy soil asset and still make money from agriculture or land management? Or if you're not in commercial agriculture, then can you build and maintain soil health for a healthy landscape? So I think the answer is yes. I don't know if I always agree with P.A. Yeomans that it can be rapid and cheap. In some situations and climates, it takes a bit longer, and it may cost you a little bit of money. But anyway, we're on the game. Like these guys here near Harden in southern New South Wales. And so I guess what the webinar series is all about, what we're going to try and cover in the 4 sessions, is helping you practice some key soil health management skills so you can build your confidence to manage your soil health a bit better for yourself at your place. And the second thing we're going to try and do through the webinar series is give you an effective process to manage your soil health well. So just like anything in life, if you follow a bit of a process, you usually get a good outcome as long as the process is a good one. And in this case, with soils, we're going to give you a bit of a step-by-step process to follow that will help you along. And the whole idea is to help you at the end of the day make better farm management decisions. Because your soil is a asset in the business, just like your machinery and your fencing, the people, the human capital, it's all, and the vegetation, the biodiversity, the whole lot is part of your capital base, and that includes soil, which is part of what we call your natural capital. So keeping your soil in good condition, your soil asset in good condition, makes a lot of sense because it'll build resilience in the farm business for sure. So the final thing is that if you want to, you can also develop a plan of soil health action for your place as you're going through the course. So I do have a worksheet or a template that I'll send through to Catherine. It looks like this one here. It's called a soil action plan. So I'll send that through to Catherine after tonight. And if you do want to if you have a soil test and you do want to start to develop an action plan for your place while we're doing this mini course online, you can feel free to do that. So that's just something that might help you with your learning as well. Okay, so just a bit of course housekeeping. We've got 4 webinars up to 90 minutes each. I'll try to facilitate Q&A as best I can, but it is a really big group, so I'm probably not going to get to everything in the time frame, but we'll certainly do our best. You can use the put your hand up little thingo, whatever it is, like down the bottom, there's that hand up, but probably best to put things in chat. Please be courteous. If you muck around, Catherine's going to be ruthless and kick you off, and I'll be backing her up on that. And I'm sure everyone will be nice, and we'll be recording it, so you can catch up if you miss it. Okay, so there are a couple of resources. I've shown you the Soil Health Action Plan worksheet. There's also a couple of other things, and one of the other things which is might be of interest to you is something called the Soil Health, a Guide to Soil Health for Australian Farmers. It's actually called Tropical Soils, but because we've done it was funded for a tropicals project, but it's actually got lots of information relevant for non-tropical soils. So for example, how soils work, like this part here, that's all really relevant to everywhere. And it's got sort of info on soil type and soil organic matter and aluminium and all the other things we'll be talking about. So that's going to be available too, and I can get that through to Catherine to get through to everyone if you'd like it. And then there'll be some videos as well, which I'll introduce you to later in the course on how to assess soil health in the paddock. So how do you go out in the paddock with a spade, or how to do things simply in the paddock. So what is the course going to cover? Well, tonight we're going to have a bit of an introduction, and I'm going to introduce you to this idea of your topsoil being a soil system. And then we're going to introduce the idea of soil types. So kind of just to set the context of when we're trying to improve soil health, there's different soil types, and there's different pros and cons of different soil types for managing soil health. And then next week we'll jump into soil health, how to manage it, and we'll introduce the really important tool of using a soil test. So soil tests are kind of a tool in the toolbox, and so I'll demystify soil tests a bit, as well as start you on the journey of assessing soil health. And the same thing for the following week. We'll just keep assessing soil health using what's called the soil health checklist and our soil test. And then in the last week, we'll kind of pull it all together, and I'll just also show you quickly a few ways to assess your soil health in the field. So that's really the course in a nutshell. Today, I've introduced you to the learning resources already, or some of them. Here's a nice winery in the Barossa Valley that I was on recently, and you can see they've sown oats in the interrow for a winter cover crop to help manage the soil, and they've also got compost under the canopy. If you can look carefully, you'll see heaps of compost being applied that they make on farm. So Steve's making on farm there. So tonight we're going to look at what is a soil system, how soils work, and this whole idea, a 21st century view of your soil as being a self-organizing system, which is a concept that's come out of ecology. And then we're going to look at the three elements of soil management: type, soil health, and fertility. And we're going to I'll introduce you to the 7 essential soil skills, if you like, including soil health management. And then we're just going to do this really first important step, which is making sense of different soil types. Because when you're managing soil health, you're actually trying to improve the health of a particular soil type, and everyone usually has different soil types. So it's good to just get a bit of a fundamental understanding on what soil type means, or in the context of management. So that's where we're headed. And if you've got any questions there, please put them into chat. It's probably easier with the big group. All right, I'm going to jump in, everyone. So what is a soil system? So I guess this is again from P.R. Yeomans in 1954, so I'm going back to the future here. But this is what he called a soil. He said all forms of life require 2 things for optimum development. They require good living conditions, which embrace air, moisture, warmth, space, and a plentiful supply of suitable food. So all forms of life require good living conditions, or a good environment, we could probably say now, and a plentiful supply of suitable food. And when these conditions exist in the soil in the right combination, there is a soil climax. So probably the term we'd now use is when we've got those things in the right combination, we'd say we have soil health. We have a high functioning soil. So that was P.R. Yeomans in 1954, and I think it's a good kind of general definition. But basically, here's some guys looking at some soil in detail here. But you can sort of see on the left that diagram from Sharon Kanile there about what a soil is. And basically, a soil is kind of a whole lot of things interacting. So that's really what we call in the modern term a system, a complex adaptive system. And so everything is kind of interacting with everything else. And when everything is interacting with everything else, and you get a kind of equilibrium, and that equilibrium is a topsoil basically. So it has structure, it has plants growing in it, and so you can have a poor equilibrium or a really good equilibrium, but your soil, the state of your topsoil is basically an equilibrium, all of those factors interacting, and your management of those factors. So that's really what a soil is these days. We kind of see it as a complex system. And so the key parts to that are all interacting is basically the soil life. So that's the microbes in the soil and the larger invertebrates, or soil insects we sometimes call them, like earthworms, which aren't a true insect, and other kinds of things in the soil, spiders, springtails, etc. Then we've got plants, and obviously the really important part of a plant for the day-to-day running of a topsoil is the roots. So those plant roots, this is a wheat plant, a very young wheat plant in Western New South Wales, right on the edge of the cropping zone, and you can see that young wheat plant has developed a really big root system, and it's starting to shape that topsoil. If because it's trying to optimize it for plant growth. Otherwise, it's not going to survive very long, that wheat plant. So you can sort of see plants, and particularly their roots, are part of a soil system. Then we've got air, we've got water, we've got the minerals in that soil that have come from the minerals fraction of the soil and the nutrient elements that they contain. And we've got this thing called organic matter, which is kind of like the legacy of plant material and other living things that are now dead, and they're influencing all different kinds of ways in the soil. So your soil, topsoil, is a kind of mishmash of all of those things interacting. And you can see here in this young wheat plant that the whole thing's kind of coming together into quite a cohesive, what we would call healthy situation, particularly for water holding, nutrient cycling, all of those benefits that it will give that young wheat plant. Okay, I'll keep rolling. So I guess to think about it from a slightly different angle, plants and the life in the soil have co-evolved for a long, long time, for about 400 million years. So the early plants that evolved on the planet came from seaweed and algae in the ocean, basically, and they were photosynthesizing in the sea and stuff. And then some of them came out and colonized the bare ground. And they had to kind of partner up with fungi and bacteria because they had to get their minerals, their nutrient elements, and they weren't in the ocean anymore where everything's dissolved. All their nutrients are dissolved in water. So they've kind of co-evolved together, and they completely depend upon each other. So all the life in the soil needs the carbohydrates, or the energy that the plants create through photosynthesis, sugars and all these other compounds. And the plants get nutrient elements that are mainly in the minerals. So that's kind of the deal that's been done. So it's this co-evolution. And as well as those two, the soil life and the plant roots interacting, you've obviously got the minerals, which get which the microbes and other things can get mineral elements from, and the soil, air and water, which obviously are essential for everything as well. So here's a topsoil in tropical North Queensland that's chock-a-block with life, and it's going quite well. So this complex system organizes itself. All of those things kind of arrange themselves into what we call a topsoil, which is obviously that area of the soil strongly under the influence of plant roots and life. And in a healthy equilibrium, if you like, that topsoil will self-regulate the environment. So it will be quite in a balanced state, and it will be optimum for the vegetation and the life that's living in it. So everything kind of organizes themselves a bit like humans. When they get into trouble, they kind of go, righto, we've got to sort this out. And they kind of, almost instinctively a lot of the time we can organize ourselves and sort out the situation. Sometimes we make errors. So you can see here two different soils about 50 centimeters apart. One's under grass and one's under a mulching regime. It's a vanilla farm in North Queensland. So different organic matter levels, different kind of management. One's mowed with grass, and they're the same soil type, but they've got a different mix of those 6 sort of factors, and they kind of arrange themselves into two quite distinct topsoils. The one on the right has 16% carbon. The one on the left's probably got about 4. Again, they're 50 centimeters apart. So you can sort of see that you get different kind of states, if you like, or situations. And so another way to think about it, here's a soil from Western Victoria. Another way to think about it is that your soil is just a whole network of relationships going on between all of the soil life and the minerals and the structure, and they're all interacting together. So if we think about it from that, it's just like a big party, really. And I guess just to reiterate that, a really important part of your topsoil is the energy that's supplied to it, energy in the form of carbohydrates, which is in the organic matter, which comes in through plant photosynthesis. So how you manage pastures or crops or trees, and how much plant material you feed to the soil, as opposed to take off in grazing or hay or whatever you're doing, cropping, how much you allocate back to the soil, not just above ground but below ground through root volume, is really critical to soil function. And that's what we'll see when we look at soil carbon next week. And all of that carbohydrate feeds all the life in the soil, and they go nuts, and therefore they spit, dribble, ooze, slobber, eat each other, do all kinds of things to cycle nutrients, create structure, access nutrients, all of that sort of stuff goes on when they get energy, all the life in the soil. And so a soil system, to sort of sum it up, a soil system, the topsoil system, cycles water, nutrients and energy really efficiently, and it optimizes the environment, if you like, for the soil community, so all the soil microbes and soil organisms. It optimizes the chemistry, so a really healthy soil can actually, to some extent, and sometimes to a great extent, stabilize pH, for example. So, and it can bring it within a range that's optimum for life. So sometimes it can't do that because one or more of the soil factors are outside a threshold. But if everything's working reasonably well, then it would tend to be quite stable chemically, as well as temperature, and structure. So you can see here this well-structured soil, and structure is, you can't buy soil structure in a bottle. Well, I can sell you stuff, but you're wasting your money. The best way to build soil structure, so that's air and water, etc., is through managing all of those factors, especially the life and the plant roots, because they will build soil structure for you. And you don't even have to pay them too much, just a bit of organic matter and love. And so I guess our challenge as land managers and farmers, graziers, is to maintain the topsoil system in a balanced state. That's really what I mean by soil health. When for your soil type, you've got your topsoil in a balanced position. And we also want to maintain a level of fertility for our production goals. So that's kind of a second step. I can have a really low fertile soil with low levels of fertility, but it can still be well structured and functioning quite well. It just may not grow a lot of things for me doing agriculture, but the soil itself can be in good condition. And vice versa, I can have a really fertile soil full of nutrients and I can add heaps of fertilizers to it, but if it's got poor structure and no roots and diseases eating everything, then the nutrients aren't cycling very effectively. So just because I've got nutrients, they may not be cycling very efficiently and the plants may not be taking them up. So soil health and soil fertility are kind of two distinct different things, and people often mix them up, which I think is a bit dangerous, and they try and fix soil health by chucking on fertilizers. But if you've got compaction, then most fertilizers are not going to help you, unless you buy them from me, of course. Okay, so that's kind of our challenge, I guess, is to help our soil develop and maintain a balanced equilibrium, a high-functioning equilibrium. So let's just quickly touch on, I guess, the three elements of soil management that really you need to build your skills in if you're looking after your soil. The first one is to know your different soil types on your place. And I'm going to assume, I'll ask a bit of a quick quiz a bit later, that you've probably got a few different soil types on your place. Most people have at least two, but not everyone. And some people have up to 10 or 12. And these guys here are looking at the complexity of soils across the southern New England and northern New South Wales. And then the second essential area of soil management, or soils that you have to sort of get your head around, is how to understand and manage soil health, like these guys here that are looking at salinity and pH in the field near Mudgee. And the third one is, of course, what I mentioned before, the fertility. So do I have enough nutrients in my soil for my production goals, like this zucchini crop in North Queensland? Or not only do I have enough nutrients, but are they cycling really efficiently and the plants can get the nutrients? So that's the kind of third dimension of soils and soil management, which we don't cover in this little course. We're really focusing on soil health, but I thought I'd just let you know. So with that in mind, there's sort of 7 soil management skills that in Soil and Food we think it's really important for you. If you're managing your own soils and they're valuable to you, there's kind of 7 soil skills that we think is a good idea to build your confidence in applying. And the 7 skills, there's 3 core skills and 4 sort of management skills. So I'm just going to quickly go through them because it'll help us set the scene for the rest of the course, because you'll be practicing some of these skills, particularly from next week. So the first really important skill you need to build for yourself is how to assess your soils in the field. So you need to know how to assess your soil in the paddock and identify issues, what we often call soil constraints. so soil health issues, which we call soil constraints, and that requires a few different ways. You can use a spade, you can use something like this penetrometer. There's different ways you can assess soil in the field, but it is a really important skill set you need to build your confidence in. And unfortunately, online training is hard to teach this one, so we won't cover it a lot, but I'll come back to it in session 4 a little bit. And there is some videos. There's lots of videos on YouTube. There's apparently 7,443,000 or something, and some of them are how to assess your soil in the field. I don't know if that 7 billion is accurate. I just pulled that out of the air, but I'm sure it doesn't matter. And then the second really important core skill is how to use a soil test, like these graziers here. You can see one of them's helping the other two guys. We'll be practicing reading soil tests for most of sessions 2, 3, and some of 4. So, and tonight I'll introduce you to soil tests. So we'll be practicing that. And that's a really important skill, but soil tests don't tell you everything. You need to also get out in the paddock and assess your soils in the field. The third important core skill is benchmarking your soils. So this is sometimes a little bit tricky. So for example, I've measured the carbon level in my soil, and here's the number on my soil test. And now I need to know whether it's good or bad. Is my carbon level enough, or do I need to buy David Hardwick's brown coal and add more carbon? So benchmarking is not always black and white, and you usually have to look at a soil holistically at a few different things to come to a conclusion. And you'll see as we practice in sessions 2, 3, and 4, as we start to practice benchmarking, that you need to kind of look at a few different indicators or symptoms, whatever term you like to use, to sort of make a decision on the situation with your soil. Okay, so apart from those 3 core skills, which 2 of which we'll practice a lot in this course, and that's reading soil tests and benchmarking, there's kind of 4 management skills that you need to build your confidence and effective decision making in around soil management. The first one is just looking after these guys. So if you can look after the worms in your paddock, pretty much everything else takes care of itself, and you can go on a holiday. But don't go fishing, because you usually use earthworms or worms for bait, and that would just be terrible for your worms that are helping you. So yeah, there are some management skills, and that's what I'm just going to introduce you to now. So the first of the key management skills, which we're going to touch on tonight, I'm going to introduce you tonight, and it's not a difficult one, and that is identifying your soil types. So you need to be able to identify the different soil types on your property and their strengths and weaknesses, and what their production potential is. Because when you're doing agriculture, you don't want to be going beyond the capability of your soil type. At that point, you're usually causing yourself problems or having to spend extra money or wasting money. So knowing your soil type is a really important first management skill, being able to identify that soil type. The second really important business skill is being able to say, well, what's my realistic enterprise goals based on that soil type? Why am I expecting to get so much live weight gain per week out of these cows on this soil type? It's just not doable. I've got to be realistic. Or why am I expecting that yield of sugarcane or grapes? Or why am I growing potatoes on this sandy soil? Like, is this really the right place to grow potatoes? So setting your realistic enterprise goals and matching your enterprise to your soil types is a really important business skill, and it comes down to your enterprise and your enterprise goals as well, your yield production goals, because it's all a cost benefit, really. The third really important skill set, which is the big one, which we'll really focus on for the majority of this course, is managing your soil health, and that has 3 steps to it. Assessing soil health, and we'll be using what's called the soil health checklist that we developed, and then managing any problems that you identify in your soil health. So that's, for example, compaction, low carbon, acidity, sodic soil. I saw in the registrations that someone has sodic soil, so high sodium in the clay. So yeah, you've got to then come up with some management solutions for that. Do you just buy Dave Hardwick's brown coal, which is very cheap at the moment? I've got it on special. No, don't buy that. And then monitoring. How do you keep an eye on your soil health over time? So here you can see a sugarcane soil that's really well aggregated through good cover crop and controlled traffic techniques. They've been able to rebuild soil structure. And the final skill, management skill, which we don't cover in this course, but it is important, and that's obviously managing the fertility or the nutrients for your farm enterprise. So there's actually 5 steps to that, but I won't go through them because they're not relevant for this little online course around soil health. But basically, again, there's a process to follow if you're managing nutrients. And here's a cane farmer that's been reducing their nitrogen. The guys up there are legislated around their nitrogen use now because of the barrier reef. And Alan Lindsay's name. Alan's been able to reduce his nitrogen use through building soil health and using legumes in crop rotation, etc. He's been able to use less nitrogen for the same yield. So, you know, he's using soil tests and things, but he's also making sure the nitrogen's cycling really efficiently, not just worried about how much nitrogen, but is it cycling efficiently? So that's the really important 4th skill, which this little 4-part series doesn't cover, but it is something to be mindful of. Okay, so I thought at that point, so hopefully everyone's got a feel for sort of the overview of soils and soil management in land management and agricultural management. And so now we're going to jump into this first of the management skills, which is managing or identifying your different soil types. And at the same time, what I'll do for the rest of the night is just introduce you to soil tests. So I'll just start to introduce you to soil tests as well. Now, if some of you have soil tests, because we're doing a large webinar, I'm not seeing everyone's faces and stuff, but if you've got a soil test, feel free to follow along as we go through it. I do have examples to show everyone and step people through, but if you do have your own soil test, then please feel free to pull it out, have it ready, and just practice reading it as we go through. Okay, so here's a grazier, Bob Harris in central Queensland. Central North, I guess, near Bowen. And yeah, when I went to a workshop on Bob's place with a few other graziers, one of the key questions Bob had was, I've got all these different soil types and the pastures are all different in them and they respond to rain differently and the cows graze them differently. And he kind of wanted to know why. So he lined them all up for the field day, which is he's obviously did his homework ready for the field day, which is great. And we all learn a lot by having all those soil types there. But basically you often have more than one soil type on your property. So I might see if anyone is still awake and hasn't gone to sleep yet. I'll just do a quick pop quiz in the chat. So if you have got a property that you're managing or you own and you know, just put into chat how many different soil types you are actually managing. So just put it into chat how many different soil types you are managing, just so I know that someone is actually technically alive listening to this webinar. 2, possibly 3. Thanks, Christine. 2 there. Jen's got 1 or 2. Nikki's got 1. Great. So a few people are awake. Thank you. Blythe is 4. Scott's got 1. Charlotte's 1. Barry. Yeah, great. Thanks, Karen. 3. And the other thing to ask you guys while those chats are coming in is, do you have any specific names? Thanks, Mark. You've got 1 for your soil type. Do you have a name? Philip's not sure. You just bought the property. Yeah, if you've got any names. So clay loam. Thanks, Jen. So obviously clay loam describes a particular aspect of soil, which is the texture. Sand over clay. Barry's got there. Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So yeah, you guys that have just sent in some names are calling. You're really actually describing the texture, which we're going to go into in a minute. But soil type is more than the texture. And decomposed granite. Thanks, Scotty. Yeah, so the texture is one part of soil type, as you'll see. Thanks, Karen. But it's not the only part. So we're going to go into that now and just investigate soil type a little bit more. Okay, so before we start, so thanks, Tanya, you've put in there sandy loam as well. So everyone's given me soil texture, and I'm going to put the proposition to you that's only part of your soil type. So let's jump into soil type and investigate what else forms soil type apart from texture. So the key thing about soils is the type of soil in any one place will depend mainly on the rocks from which it's formed. So with a bit of help from a few other processes. So here is a young soil in the central west of New South Wales. So it's on a place called the Liverpool Range, if anyone's heard of that. So on the eastern side of that range is the Hunter Valley, and on the western side is the Liverpool Plains. So I'm right at the top of the Great Divide on the Liverpool Range there. and I am looking at a young soil. And the reason that I know it's quite young is there's still rocks in the topsoil that haven't broken down. So you can kind of see there's still rocks there. And I've got a few other names for soil types: red soil, black soils. Thanks, Claire, have come in. So can everyone see that that topsoil is actually growing a forest? There's grass and trees growing into that. But you can sort of see that there's kind of a lot of rocks still in the topsoil as well as the minerals. So it's those rocks, the type of rocks that's actually critical for influencing soil type in any situation. So through a process called weathering, rocks break down into minerals. So here's another soil. This is a granite-derived soil, so it's derived from granite rocks. The difference here is there's no longer any rocks left in the landscape. They've all been broken down. There is quite close to here, this is at Tenterfield in northern New South Wales on a nice winter's day. There is quite close to here areas where rocks are all over the joint. So just north of here is quite rocky with lots of granite boulders. But in this situation, those granite boulders have all been weathered down and they've now just turned into the minerals that make up that soil. So obviously, minerals keep breaking down. That's the reality of life, just like losing your hair and growing old is just the reality. So no matter how much Botox you're using, you just can't stop it. You're going to die at some point. You're going to get old. It's the same with rocks and minerals. They just keep weathering. So you can't stop it. Not even Elon Musk can stop weathering. She can try, but it's not going to happen. So as minerals break down, they keep breaking down, and then as they break down, they kind of get transformed, and some of them get rearranged through processes I won't go into too much. But some of them turn into clays, and some of them turn into silt, and some of them stay as sand. So we kind of get these different types of particles after rocks break down. So rocks break down to minerals, and minerals break down to different particles. And it's these minerals that really define your soil type. So that the type of minerals that your soil has inherited from its rocks, and the rocks mightn't be where you live. They may be up in a mountain somewhere and you live on a floodplain, and the minerals have come from millions of years ago from somewhere else. So that's pretty common in many areas. But those minerals are what give your soil, really define its type. So there is a couple of other things going on though for soil minerals, and it's how old they are and how long they've been weathered. And the topography and vegetation also do influence the mineralogy of a soil, and more we're realizing that plants can actually modify the mineral composition, if you like, or the type of minerals can actually be biologically influenced. So that's another factor. But in general, the type of minerals does drive the main show. And this is just a little bit of a different picture for you to show you, to break up me carrying on. Here is a soil in the northern New South Wales, in the New England of New South Wales, if anyone knows that area. And you can see, if you look really carefully, that this is a kind of gully in a watercourse. It's actually would have been probably originally, or definitely would have been a chain of ponds or swampy meadow. The original homestead for the first sort of, even the shepherds that came up here first, the first Europeans that came on here, would have camped near here because there's permanent water and probably really good grass for the sheep. And you can see the layer here below. I'm just drawing a line, if you can everyone see, hopefully. You can see there's a line, and below that line the soil is quite dark. There's quite a dark layer, and above that line, I'll just clear that. I'll make it a thinner line so it's not too rough. Below that line is quite a dark layer, and above that line is quite brown, a lighter brown. You can see that dark layer extends down to about there. So that's what we would have called a swampy peat layer. That was probably, when it was a chain of ponds or a swampy meadow, that was probably probably since the last ice age. That was the kind of topsoil, and it was high organic matter in there, not just minerals. Whereas this layer here, this topsoil, which we call a post-settlement alluvium, so it's been deposited since European settlement, was probably from that first 50 or 80 years where you had sheep and you had a change in land use, probably less ground cover at certain key times. rabbits came in the 1920s or whenever and went nuts. And so you had movement of soil down slope through erosion over 100 years or so, and deposited down in the flat. And you can sort of see that quite distinct different type, if you like, of topsoil. So it's obviously stabilized a lot now with better ground cover and stuff, probably the last 50 years in many areas that has happened, and it's stabilized. But yeah, just an example for you of how it is the minerals, but there is organic matter, and the landscape processes also influence things and why minerals are where they are. Okay, so I'll keep rolling. So I guess just to follow on from the last question I asked you guys, here's a vineyard in Hunter Valley about to be planted. And as you know, if you want to make $1 million out of grapes, you've got to start with 5 million. No, I'm just kidding. If there's any grape growers, it's just a joke. But yeah, you can see here, this is a particular soil type that they're planting grapes onto. So I guess the question, another quick question for you guys is, what characteristics of a soil mainly come from those minerals? So we're talking soil type, we're talking those long-term, fairly permanent characteristics of a soil that it actually inherits from its minerals. So you guys have already given me some of the answers. So Charlotte's put color. Thank you, Charlotte. Exactly. That's one of the big characteristics. Minerals strongly influence soil color. They're not the only thing, but they are definitely one of the big things. Anyone else want to have a stab at what characteristics of that soil or any other soil it strongly inherits? Yeah, Christine's put color and particle size. Definitely, Christine. And particle size is just another way of saying soil texture, which we'll go over in a minute. Mineral content. Thanks, Blythe. Yeah, so the mineral composition. Yep, you guys have got it. There's one other characteristics that mostly comes from the minerals, not only from the minerals, and there are exceptions to this kind of one, but it's comes strongly. So acidity, Barry, definitely is influenced by the mineral composition, but it's just as influenced by rainfall and organic matter and vegetation and land use. So I'm not going to put it in this soil type category, but it definitely is influenced by it. It does have a shaping factor. Nutrient availability, yeah, to some extent, but Sandy, I'd argue that nutrient availability is more driven by biological processes than inherent soil type. I know for phosphorus, you know, it sometimes sits more tightly in the soil. Fertility, yeah, which is this mineral composition, Claire. So I'm going to keep going, although you guys have covered most of the bases, but there is one that I'm going to throw in that you guys haven't got. And so color is obviously the first one. So color is this key aspect of a soil that it strongly inherits from its minerals. The other things that give soil a color, of course, is water. When it's moist, it's usually darker, and organic matter can modify a soil. And you can see here, I'm in a soil pit in southwestern New South Wales, out in the far west, southwest. You can see it's quite a high iron soil. It's quite red, but you can see the calcium deposits. If everyone can see that white mottling, it's in shadow, unfortunately, but you can see the white mottling there, in there. And then the second characteristic is mineral composition, texture, and soil colloid. So we're just going to quickly go through them tonight and break them down a little bit and start to have a look at a soil test. And these four aspects of your soil, they're kind of, you can modify the colloid a bit, but the rest of them, you kind of just got to live with what you've got. So you've got to adapt your farm business to manage to within the limitation or the capacity of your soil type. So let's start with mineral composition. So this is also known as the soil's total fertility, and it's the total level of nutrients in a soil, both unavailable, or what we call as humans available and unavailable, although I don't really like to use those terms, because in a healthy soil in equilibrium, it will be making available nutrients from all kinds of places. So just because we think it's unavailable, fungi don't listen to us, and they get it from very tied up, insoluble forms. But yes, it's the total fertility. So we sometimes say the mineral composition, or inherent fertility. So let's have a look at that. So I've just put that table up there, but I'll show you a more detailed table to get into a bit of depth. So here is 9 soils from across Eastern Australia. Hopefully everyone can see that. We've got soils from Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. I don't have any, I'll show you a Northern Territory soil a bit later, and I don't have a WA soil on hand, but I will get some for next time. And if you have a look, we've sent the soils off to the lab, And we've just asked the lab to measure the total fertility. We don't care whether it's available or unavailable. We couldn't care less. We just want to know what the potential reserve of nutrients is for the landscape. So if we're in a natural landscape, that's what's one of the limiting factors of vegetation and biodiversity and animals and productivity in a natural national park is strongly driven by the inherent fertility reserve. And it is actually the same in agriculture. So, you know, the fertility level does influence our production potential, even though we can also add fertilizers. So let's have a look at calcium. This first soil, which is a black cracking clay soil in southeast Queensland near Lowood in the Brisbane Valley, very fertile area, volcanic soil off the Toowoomba Range that's come down over the last few million years and formed there, deep topsoil. And you can see its total calcium is 5,000. Here's a granite soil in northern New South Wales on granite rock, formed on granite rock with a total calcium of 650. And here's a tropical granite up in far north Queensland, south of Cairns, with heavy rainfall as well. And you can see it's got almost no calcium in that topsoil to play with. Very low, inherently low fertility soil, particularly for calcium. So you can sort of see the different levels across those soils depending on their location, the climate, but particularly the geology of the minerals. You could do the same for all of the elements, but just for tonight, I'm mindful of time, I'll just do phosphorus. So that first soil is 1294 parts per million, and then we've got 89 in the granite total phosphorus. So you can sort of see that the granite versus basaltic rock minerals has a very big difference. And your sedimentary type rocks, your kind of what we call trap rock on the New England, or sediments or gneisses or any metamorphic type geologies, they're usually somewhere in between granites and basalts. Here is a high iron soil. Some of you might know the red soils that grow potatoes and things like that. This is a sugarcane high iron soil near Innisfail, and you can see it's got oodles of phosphorus compared to other soils. Whether that phosphorus is cycling very readily is another matter, but it has a lot of phosphorus there. And here is a former tobacco field in northeast Victoria, and this is probably one of those exceptions to the rule where the total phosphorus there is probably strongly influenced by fertilizer history, whereas even in other intensively farmed areas, the total phosphorus and sulfur and things, it's not often spiked, if you like, by fertilizer history, but there are definitely exceptions to that. And your really intense things like tobacco or veggies on light soils, low fertility soil types, can definitely spike key nutrients. You'll see it in dairies where they put too much manure out for a number of decades, and that can lift the total phosphorus up as well. So yeah, you can sort of see that totals. And the other thing to be mindful of at this point, which we'll come back to later down the course, is all soils have aluminium in them. So you can see here, aluminium 21,000, nearly 10,000, 4,000 in that granite, not a lot. 7,000, nearly 104,000. Aluminium is a common element in all topsoil minerals. The problem with aluminium is not when it's in your soil, it's when it's parting in your soil, when it comes out to party. And we'll explore that in session 3 when we look at the colloid and exchangeable aluminium. But all soils have aluminium. And final thing to note from this is we've got nitrogen, and I've put nitrogen down the bottom separately. And the reason I've done that is that nitrogen doesn't live in minerals. It comes from the air. It lives in the air. Like most of the air we breathe is nitrogen. It's 80% of the air. So you measure it differently on a soil test. So it's measured as a percentage because it lives in the organic matter fraction of your soil. So you can sort of see we've kept nitrogen separate from the rest of them. So that just gives you a feel for this thing, this total reserves, and how different soil mineral composition of soils are different depending on their geology or their type of minerals that they're formed from, if that makes sense. But we're not estimating at this point what's available and unavailable. That's kind of a second question. Our challenge in agriculture is to make whatever nutrients are there available. And the second key part, so just to show you another example of that, here's a soil test from a lab. So during this course, I've got different labs and different soil tests. This is EAL, which is a lab at Lismore, part of the Southern Cross Uni. And if this is, we've asked the lab to not only do a normal agronomic test, we've asked them to test the total fertility, which is an extra test that costs you a bit of money, like $60 more or $50 more. So you can sort of see, we've asked them to do the totals, and they've put them at the back of the test here. And here's our total calcium, a total sulfur, total phosphorus, etc. So we've asked them to measure that total, just so we can learn more about our soil and the overall potential of that soil type. And if anyone's feeling a bit despondent about their soil because they think they've got pretty ordinary soils or whatever, then all you have to do is look at a Northern Territory soil, because that'll cheer you up. So here is some soils from the Northern Territory, 4 different soils, and you can see the total. We asked them to, this is near Catherine, you can see the totals. We've asked them to measure the totals at the lab as an extra test, and our total phosphorus is 161, 78, and less than 50. So if you think you've got light fertility soils, then just always look at a Northern Territory soil. It'll cheer you up, because they're usually very low in fertility. They've got very light soil types that are low in fertility because they're ancient landscapes that have been weathered for a long time. And so that's mineral composition, and it kind of doesn't tell you what nutrients are available for this season, but it tells you the long-term potential of a soil type for production. And it then helps you, inform you on what sort of fertilizers you need to focus on, or fertilizer nutrients, because of your soil type. So the second really important aspect of your soil is soil texture. I won't go into it too much, but it gives your soil its feel, and that's because it's the proportion of sand, silt, and clay in the soil. So obviously sandy soils have a more sand than clay, or they might not have any clay or very little clay, and some soils have a lot of silt in them. If they've got a lot of silt in them, does anyone know what you call the texture you call a soil that is high in silt? Does anyone know what you call it? You say it's a something soil texture. Anyone want to have a go? Pretty sure we've got someone here that'll know the answer. Not sodic. Thanks, Sophie. Good guess, but no, it's not sodic. Thanks for trying. The term we use is loam. So when you say your soil is loamy, thanks, Charlotte, you got it. A loam soil has a fair bit of silt. Now, just to put it in proportion for you guys, and some of you guys I know I can see it on your soils, but sand is the largest particle in the soil. So if a sand grain is that big, then a silt grain may be that big, and a clay particle might be that big. So you can see the different size proportions in a soil. So sand is the largest grain, then silt is much smaller, and then clay is much smaller again. So how can you measure that? Well, you can do it in the field with a texture test, which some of you may have done, and we do have a video on that, so we will share that video on how to assess your own texture. But you can get it done by the lab, and you can ask the lab to measure your soil texture. Here's a lab that's done it for these guys. So this is another lab. This is through NutriWise, so it's the mainstream Inside Tech lab. But we've asked the pretty sure, hopefully I'm not going to be causing myself a problem. We've asked them to measure the soil texture. I'm pretty sure. No, we didn't on that one. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. I'll have to get it on another one, and I'll get it on this one. Here's a soil from North Queensland, and you can see that the lab has done what's called a basic texture test, and they've said it's loam. So they've done a basic test. Some labs you can get them to do a more accurate assessment of sand, silt, and clay proportion, or what's called particle size distribution. You have to pay a little bit more through it, and some labs will do it as a standard test. I thought it was on that Insotech test, but anyway, I got myself caught up there. So yeah, you can get a lab to measure the texture, and some labs will do it as part of a standard test that you receive back from them. For other labs, you have to ask for it specifically, but you can do it very easily yourself in the field with a ribbon test. Okay, so the final big part of soil type that I just wanted to cover tonight, which is important to get your head around a little bit, and later on we're going to come back to this because it's kind of it is an important area of soil health that you need to get your head around. So I'm just going to introduce the concept tonight, and that is something called the soil's colloid. So colloid is a technical term that some of you may not have heard of. So I'm just going to pull it apart a bit because it is quite important. And it's probably the most tricky part of soils to get your head around. Generally, when people are learning about soils, the colloid and the CEC and stuff is the one that gets everyone in a knot, and they just reach for another beer and say too hard. And when we do session 3 in 2 weeks' time, you're not allowed to drink any alcohol. Or it can be low-strength alcohol, because explaining CEC at 8:30 at night with people drinking beer is very tricky. So what is a colloid? Well, let's start with milk. So the question is, why is that milk white? And don't say it's because it's vanilla flavored, Dave. That's not the answer. So why is the milk white? So does anyone want to have a crack at why that milk is white? What is the main ingredient in it? When you buy milk, what's the main ingredient that you buy? Calcium. It's not calcium, Scott. You watch way too many dairy ads, mate. And you should be on the vegan milk anyway, my friend. Yeah, no, it's not calcium, Scott. Anyone else? It's in a form that can be absorbed, the calcium? No, Charlotte. You've got to stop watching dairy ads, everyone. Scott's going, what the hell is he carrying on about? Suspended milk fats. Thanks, Veronica. So the main ingredient when you buy milk, you buy water. That's the main ingredient you're buying. And the second thing is, the reason that the water is white is something is in suspension in that water. And the thing that's in suspension is fat. So Robin's got it as well. So if you just imagine, I'll just try and draw it here since I've got the squiggly doodah going. Imagine we've got this glass of water and we've got these little fat particles that are in suspension. So they're all in suspension in the water and they're kind of swirling around. So when things are really, really small, a really, really small particle size, and they stay in suspension in the water, we call them a colloid. And the reason that they stay in suspension, if I zoom in on this fat particle, is that they have this charge, electrostatic charge, literally a charge on their surface. So imagine a couple of fat particles in the water and they've all got, say, a negative charge on their surface. Then they'll just, and this one's got a negative charge and this one's got, so they're all just swirling around, bouncing off each other. So they're not going to fall out and drop to the bottom under gravity, and they're not going to dissolve. They won't dissolve and disappear. Like if I put table salt in there, it would disappear and it'd dissolve and you wouldn't see it. It'd dissolve into its single ions. So we're talking quite small particles around that 3 micron, 5 micron sort of thing, less than that. And they have this charge on them, and so they just swirl around in the water and stay in suspension. So another example for you of that is clay in a muddy dam or clay in a river. So in still water, the clay is not settling out, it's staying in suspension. So anything that stays in suspension, in this case clay or fat in the milk, is acting as a colloid. So it's in a colloid state. There's lots of colloids in life. We deal with them every day in life, like aerosols in the toilet is particles in a gas suspension. So the technical name for that is an aerosol. Emulsion, some of you might have heard of emulsion, which is a kind of a liquid in a liquid sort of thing. So there's different states of suspension, but at the end of the day, one of the properties of these things, these small particles, is that when they're acting as a colloid, is that they have this charge on their surface. And your soil, it's kind of not really, Charlotte. The dispersion test will, we will cover it. Sorry, I'll get back to it later. It's not. No, Sandy, you can't interchange those terms. Aggregate is a structure. Colloid is literally a surface charge, or the colloids do influence structure, but they're not the only part of structure. Hopefully it will make sense by the end of the course. So let's just jump in a little bit more on this colloid. So in your soil, here's some clay particles. So clay is a colloid, and there's different types of clay, and they have different types of charges. But clay is a colloid, and it has a charge. And the way you measure that charge on its surface is through something on your soil test called cation exchange capacity, or CEC. So the CEC, all it measures in your soil, just to demystify it, is the size of the colloid charge in the soil, so the surface area charge of colloids in your soil. The main colloid in many soils is the clay, because clay is a colloid. It acts as a colloid. But the second main colloid in a soil is the humus, which we'll come back to next week, which is the organic matter, the long-term organic matter. It also is a colloid. So your CEC, or charge size, or colloid size, is determined by the type of clay and how much clay you have and the humus content. So it's strongly influenced by your soil texture, as you can see, because if you have a lot of clay, you may have a big charge, not always, but a lot of the time. So let's see how you measure this mysterious thing called the colloid charge. So let's have a look at a few soils. So let's go back to the Northern Territory soils. So here is, this is this soil from EAL Laboratories. And again, I'm just showing you the raw. We'll practice reading these tests next time. So if you're wondering what the hell these numbers all are, I'm just introducing them to you. So you can see here, this part of the test here, this side of the test is all the different indicators or things we're measuring. You can see they've put in there effective cation exchange capacity, or ECC. Sometimes people put E in front of it. It just means at the field pH. And then you can sort of see they've given a number. So these Northern Territory soils have a charge size of 2, 2.26, 1, which is kind of beach sand, and 2.4. So they're quite small charges. Let's compare that to some other soils. So here is a very different soil test. This is a horticulture soil test from a different lab, from AgVita in Tasmania, and this is a vegetable crop. And you can see they've also measured the CEC, because it's such an important property of all soils that all labs will measure this. So they've put CEC and then they put the E after it. Instead of ECC, they've just put CCE. But you can sort of see they've measured 10.5. Everyone see that? So that's just the charge. So that's telling us that this soil probably has a bit more clay content than those Northern Territory soils around Katherine. So it probably has more clay in the soil texture. You'll also notice at this point that it hasn't benchmarked it. And we will come back to soil tests and how you read them next week in detail. But just for now, notice how they've given a kind of status and optimum range up the top here, so that you can kind of, well, what's the number mean? Is it good or bad? And if you have a look at that CC number, they haven't actually benchmarked it. They've left it blank. So they're not telling you whether 10 is good or bad. They're just saying, well, you've got 10. The reason is that they consider CEC to be part of your soil type. It's not good or bad, it's just what you've got. You know, it's like saying someone's tall or short. Well, that's who you are. Sorry, Dave, you're a bald bloke. You know, you got to live with it, mate. So soil type is kind of just the type of soil you got with. All soil types have their pros and their cons. So the bigger the CEC is not necessarily better. It's just I have a little one or a large one or a medium one. And you can see here they're using it to define soil type for this particular lab. They say, well, you've got a medium charge on your colloid between 8 and 12, and therefore we're saying you're a medium soil type. So they use it to categorize their soil type, whereas most people use soil texture, sand, silt, and clay. But hopefully you can kind of see they're a bit related. So it's not good or bad. Let's have a look at another lab just to break this down even more. Here's our InsoTech Pivot Lab. This is a Western Victoria cropping paddock, a Wimmera paddock. And if you have a look, it's laid out really in a user-friendly way for you. I'm just kidding. Don't worry, we'll get into it next time. Oh, there's the texture. Everyone remember I was looking for texture. I knew they had done it. So they'd measured the texture on this for the client. But the second thing they've done at the 0 to 10 depth is measure the effective cation exchange capacity, which is this really important part of my soil, this charge in my soil. So this soil has a charge of 3, so it's quite small compared to that last horticulture paddock. And look at the range or the benchmark they've given them, anywhere between 0 and 100. Well, even a blind donkey that's drunk can hit that, because it's anywhere between, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but donkeys don't understand English, so they're all good. So you can sort of see that it's very easy to hit that target. Yeah, so like you couldn't fail hitting that target, whatever soil you have, because you're between that. So that's their way of sort of saying that CEC is not good or bad, it's just is what it is. So you can see how the InsiTech Pivot Lab has done that. They've just given you a really broad benchmark to hit. And like anyone, literally any soil on the planet can hit that benchmark. It's true that it's good to have a little bit of charge. Don't get me wrong. It's true to have a bit of charge in your soil. It is really important functionally for a soil. But a small charge isn't necessarily bad, as you'll see in session 3. Okay, so I just thought I'd introduce you to that key aspect of your soil, that your soil has a charge, and it is influenced by the organic matter as well, particularly the humus. So that will increase the charge size in a soil. And if we go back to the these total handout that I showed you, these 9 soils, you'll see at the bottom I've put the charge sizes in the soil as well, the colloid size. So the first soil, its CEC, or cation exchange capacity, or size of the colloid, is 45. So it's a heavy clay soil, and the clay has a very big charge. Here is a granite soil with not much clay in it. It has quite good organic matter, this particular soil. So the humus is giving it a bit of a charge. And if you have a look at soil number 5, this is this high iron red soil. So some of you would have seen those soils. They're very bright red. They kind of look like clay. They feel like clay. Their charge is actually like beach sand. It's very small. And it's because they've got what we call iron oxides or sequioxides, which is a type of clay that doesn't have any charge. It's very misleading or deceiving in terms of its colloid, whereas most other clays have some or a large charge, but not the iron oxide, sequioxide type soils. They have very small charges, even though they look and feel like clay. And if you've got a Maremma dog on it, it's turning red permanently, like we used to have on the dairy. So you can kind of see you've got, and this soil on the end is this vanilla soil. Remember I showed you that picture of that side by side of the mowed grass and the vanilla bed, which is high in organic matter. It's got a really large charge of 34, and that's predominantly from the organic matter, from the humus. And that's very rare. That's a very unusual situation. Humus doesn't usually increase your soil CEC that much from, say, 5 to 34, but because of the enormous amount of humus that's formed, they have got a big increase in charge size. And that's one way you know that you're increasing humus, is as your CEC increases. Okay, so let me get back to our presentation. So hopefully that CEC is a bit clearer now. It's literally just this charge. The colloid is just this charge in your soil, which is the charge on the surface of your clays and on the surface of your humus. And you'll see why it's important in session 3. It helps with a number of soil functions, so it is really important. And things like sodic soil someone brought up. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. But we'll go further down the CEC and cation pathway in session 3 when you're not allowed to drink any alcohol, because you'll confuse me more than yourselves. And so if we think about it, your soil type is this size of one of the aspects of your soil type is the size of my CEC. Is it large, medium, or small? Here's a orchard in North Queensland where they're mulching and they're improving the humus content. That will automatically lift the CEC. So a small CEC soil is not necessarily a bad soil. It's just different than a large CEC soil, and they have their pros and cons. So, but sometimes people think, oh, more CEC is better, and I personally don't think that's technically correct at all, although having some CEC in a light sandy soil is good. Definitely a little bit is good. If you have 0, then it's pretty much hydroponics. And so if we think about soil type, just to pull it all together, here's one of those high iron soils. If we just think about soil type, your soil's type is like the total fertility, which is the total level of nutrients in the soil, both available and unavailable. It's the texture, the sand, silt, and clay, and it's the soil colloid, so the size of that electrostatic charge on the soil. which has certain properties which we'll go into in depth later on. So that's really your soil type. So if you're just saying I've got a sandy soil or a clay soil or a red soil, you're only really capturing a part of your soil type actually. And so really when you're thinking about your soil type, it's about those three things combined. You know, do I have a sandy soil with a small CC and moderately low fertility, or I have a clay soil with a medium CC and moderately high fertility or very high fertility. So it just helps you understand, I guess, the long-term potential of your soils. So the key things to remember about soil type is that it doesn't change much under management. Yes, you can improve things like structure and pH and biology and roots and all that, but that's not soil type. Your soil type is these fairly permanent properties. Apart from the colloid, you can, with humus management, increase that to some extent. But otherwise, you know, you've got to live with what you've got, basically, unless you're Gina Reinhardt and you want, or Twiggy Forrest, and you want to just add billions of dollars and change it. And there are definitely, I was over in the Barossa Valley last week, and the guys are adding clay to topsoils, sandy topsoils, to improve or change their texture to make them a little bit more easier to manage for that enterprise. But obviously that's an economic decision, and it can be quite a big economic decision to change soil texture. Knowing your soil type is important because it influences every farm management decision you'll make. Basically, why the animals graze somewhere, not somewhere else, why the different grasses go here and there, why this area bounces back after rain, a light rainfall more than this one. All of that's influences from soil type. Once you know your soil type, you don't need to check it every year. So it's not like you have to check it every year. It's like, okay, I know my soil type now, I don't need to check it every year. So it's not good or bad. It is what it is. Here's a vineyard soil in the Barossa that we were looking at the other day. You can see it has a very distinct change from the topsoil to the subsoil. We won't really talk about subsoils in this course, but sometimes it's really relevant. But yeah, you can just sort of see the quite distinct change in soil type, if you like, from this topsoil to the subsoil. It is what it is. You've got to live with it. And a key soil management principle is to match your enterprise to your soil type. So am I doing the right crop or pastures or livestock enterprise, and am I being realistic with my yield goals? So if you're in sugarcane, I think there's one or two cane growers here. You know, for example, if you've got 6 soil types, and why have you got the same yield expectation across the paddock? I know it's difficult because they're all, you know, they're quite close together, but you know, you might have a soil type that has 100-ton yield potential and one that has 80, just because of soil type. So why would you manage them the same? And the challenge is how you can differentiate that manage, because obviously it's equipment and timing and mapping the soil types and all that sort of thing that comes into it. But this is the important thing, is matching your enterprise to your soil types. In grazing landscapes, soil type influences the type of pastures it'll grow, the behavior and nutrition of the grazing animals, and how you use lime, for example. Why would I use lime at the same rate on all the different soil types? That's just helping the liming company, but it may not be helping me. And if I'm in horticulture and cropping, well, things like water and irrigation scheduling, mulching tactics, yield potential, you know, all of those things, drainage and root diseases, they're all influenced by soil type. So, you know, all of your management decisions are going to be influenced by soil type. Hence, that's why we focus on it tonight. So that, in a nutshell, is soil type, and that's pretty much it for tonight. Tonight's the easy night where I just ease you into it. And the other thing that I've done tonight, I guess what I've done is kind of introduce you to the idea that your topsoil is a system and that it can self-organize. It can obtain and maintain equilibrium. The question is, can we help it? Can we support that soil system to maintain an equilibrium that's beneficial for our crops and pastures? Because the soil can be in a really degraded equilibrium with no air and water and compacted, and it'll stay like that for a long time unless you get some plant roots growing in it, and they can help you to start to change that soil to have better structure, better air, better water, etc. So you can sort of see you've got to use plants to help you change the equilibrium of the soil. And that's kind of a very 21st century view, is that plants are your partners in the whole idea of building and maintaining soil. They're kind of like you're supporting them. They're doing the hard work. If you support your plants, they'll do the hard work of building that soil system up, as we'll see when we look at soil health. So yeah, any burning questions on soil types or so in the Northern Territory, they have 3 soil types. They have red shit, yellow shit, and white shit. And that's what they told me when I went up there to do some work a few years ago. So really, they should have really said we've got low fertility, sandy soil, Dave, with a small CC. And we've got one that's red, one that's white, and one that's yellow. So basically, don't swear at your soils or don't give them nasty names, because you rely on them. And in fact, you can make quite a lot of money from red shit. So this is a Catherine soil with a very productive commercial mango orchard on it, and yet it has this very small CEC. You've just been looking at the numbers, and it has bugger all fertility, and it's quite a light textured soil, but it still can be profitable if you manage the soil type and keep it in good health, and you manage the fertilizer program to match the soil type, not just your yield. Then you can be very profitable on these sort of soil types. So just because it's a red shit soil type, according to the Northern Territory definition, and then, it doesn't mean it cannot be profitable. So you can have different soil types. They can be profitable depending how you manage them. Alicia, we're going to go into improving soil health in the next couple of sessions. So I'll probably hold off on that. But definitely, we can definitely brainstorm around your challenge of capeweed and, trying to improve the pasture and soil quality without chemicals. So as I've sort of alluded to tonight, one of the key things is work with plants. Plants can actually help you modify soil and improve soil structure, but sometimes they need a little bit of help. For example, if it's compacted and they can't grow very well, then you have to open it up so they can grow well, or if it's too acidic, etc. So we'll look at some of the ways you can trigger improvement in that soil and therefore pasture composition. Yeah. Sophie's soil fertility, which we don't cover greatly in this course, but the way we do total fertility is a soil test. We just ask the lab to measure an extra thing on a soil test. So here is a soil test. I'll just get one up from EAL. This is a soil test from one of the labs, and I'll be showing you different labs, but this lab, all we've done is ask the lab to not just measure the normal soil test things and agronomic things like available nutrients and pH and carbon. We've asked the lab to measure total fertility. So it's an extra test, and you have to order it, and it costs you $50-$60 more, but you get the total fertility, not just the available fertility, like available phosphorus, which is on the first page of this particular test, which is normal agronomic test will do the available kind of test, like this one or this one here, and then whereas tonight we're just looking at total fertility or mineral composition. Okay, so any other questions or comments? I might just, any other final burning questions for session 1? Feel free to chuck them in now. We've got a couple of minutes, and then I'll just sort of get you guys ready for next week. Everyone's fallen asleep. That's not good. But anyway, hopefully it's helping you. Thanks, Tanya. No worries. All right. Well, we'll have more opportunities in the next couple of weeks. So if other questions pop up or they're soil health related, then feel free to have them ready and bring them up. Jen, we won't go into water, specifically soil water measurements in this, because it is a bit of an introductory course, and measuring plant available water and stuff, because it's its whole own topic. So we won't go too far into it, but I'll certainly give you a guidance on how to measure infiltration of water. No worries, Philip and Jen. No, all good. So I think, no worries, Scotty. Thanks for that. So, so thanks everyone. So just a summary for next week. So what we'll be doing is you'll be starting to practice using soil tests. So I'll pull apart soil tests next week, and we'll go through the parts of a soil test. So we'll just demystify them, because they look quite complex, and they are a little bit, but once you understand the 5 parts to them, all good. No worries, Jess. Welcome from Darren, David, using soil tests. And then we'll be starting this process of managing soil health. And I'll be introducing you to the soil health checklist. So next week, we'll be tackling soil carbon and organic matter and the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And we'll be practicing these key steps of benchmarking soil health, and do I have a problem? And if I have a problem, what do I do about it? So we'll be getting into the meaty stuff next time. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming along. Yeah, we hope you got something from it, and look forward to seeing you again all next week.
Thank you very much, David. Before people start jumping off, we'll be back next Wednesday night with David, but he is also doing a webinar next Wednesday morning, bright and early at 7 o'clock in the morning, called Bugs and Brews. And that is a partnership between Wimmera Catchment Management Authority and Vic No-Till. So if you're interested in doing 2 webinars next Wednesday with David, if you go to www.vicnotil.com.au to register for the morning session. But as you've registered for this one, I'll send you I'll resend the confirmation out next Wednesday to jump back on. When you exit this webinar, it will pop up a short evaluation for tonight. So please take the time. It should only be a couple of minutes to fill that out, which gives us some great feedback that we can build into next week. But on behalf of David, Partners in Ag, and Wimmera CMA, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everyone.